Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So before we begin, let's talk about the topics that we are going to discuss today, and then I have a couple of important announcements and then we'll get started with the discussion. So from the daily edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles. There are 6 topics that are important both for prelims and mains exam, and they require a comprehensive analysis, and 4 small topics for the prelims. So let's cover all these articles in complete detailed manner so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before we start, please note that the platinum program that we have launched, the course has just begun and the enrollment is about to close. Platinum is an opportunity for those students who require hand holding by the teachers, by the educators. It's an opportunity where you can interact with the teachers live on camera during the class. It would help you gain some insights and mentorship from the teachers themselves. And more importantly, this feature gives you an option where you can send answers, get them evaluated by your teachers, and use that to improve your answer writing. So if you're someone who needs handholding throughout your preparation, Platinum would be the right option for you. And the first batch which has started will close very soon. So this is the last opportunity for you to enroll for the program. Those interested can click on the link provided in the video description below. Now, if you want the PDF of this session, please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. I'll be sharing the PDF over here after the class ends. So let's get started and look at this important editorial and a related article, which is present on page 8 and 10 of today's The Hindu newspaper. So this editorial is focused on the recent presidential reference that was raised by President of India, Draupadi Murmu, to the Supreme Court of India as per the provisions of Article 143 of the Indian Constitution. Now, to understand this topic, we have to go back and look at the context, look at the background as well. And then we'll discuss the importance of this presidential reference, the controversy surrounding it. And we'll also talk about the viewpoint of the editorial. And let me tell you that the editorial has a slightly biased viewpoint. It's only presenting you one side of the argument. So I would like to go beyond the article and provide you a more balanced analysis so that you can prepare for the upcoming examination. So let's talk about the issue at hand. Why was this presidential reference brought up by the President of India? See, this is related to one of the most important aspects of center state relations. It is related to the office of the governor, the role and functions of a governor, and how it often runs into conflict with that of an elected state government and state legislature. We have seen that, especially in states like Tamil Nadu, or let's say in Punjab, where you have the opposition parties in power, right? Compared to the ruling party at the center, if opposition parties are in power at the state, it's often seen that the governors end up playing a controversial role, and that has been the allegation by the state governments, by the state legislatures. So, one recent issue which has come up is that governors end up blocking the bills that are passed by the state legislature. Now, if you take the example of the state of Tamil Nadu, in Tamil Nadu, 10 bills were passed by the state legislature over the last couple of years, and none of them have been granted assent by the governor. Governor R.N. Ravi has attracted a lot of controversy and criticism for allegedly trying to derail the legislative business of the elected state legislature. So the state government has alleged that the governor R.N. Ravi is acting like an agent of the center, trying to meddle with the autonomy and the jurisdiction of the state legislature and the state government, which could undermine federalism, which is a part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. So the same allegations have come up in other states as well, in other opposition ruled states. And this is not something which is new. Since many, many decades, even under previous central governments as well, there has been an allegation that the office of governor is often misused for political reasons, to overstep the jurisdiction, to interfere with the business of the state governments, which are democratically elected. But there is a counterpoint to this as well. Because if you look at the Indian Constitution, when it comes to bills which are passed by the state legislature, there are two important provisions that you need to be aware of. This is Article 200 and Article 201. These articles contains the powers of the governor. It basically prescribes and defines the role of the governor with regard to the bills that are passed by the state legislature. So according to Article 200, the governor of a state has three options when a bill is passed by a state legislature. Either the governor can grant assent to the bill, and thus the bill will become an act and eventually it will come into force. The second option is that the governor can withhold assent. And the third option is that the governor can send it back to the state legislature, asking for certain changes to be included. And once the state legislature passes that bill again with or without amendments, then the governor is bound by the constitution to grant the assent. The state legislature returns the bill again if it passes the bill again with or without amendments. Whether it accepts the recommendations of the governor or not doesn't matter. Then the governor would be bound by the constitution to grant assent. These are the three options available to a governor and under Article 200. But as you can see, there is no time limit which has been prescribed over here. The governor is not bound by any deadline, be it for granting the assent or withholding the bill for an indefinite period, or even to send it back and then after it comes back to grant the assent. There is no specific time limit or deadline prescribed by the constitution makers, which means the governor has a certain degree of discretion over here. But this runs into conflict with the other constitutional provision, which states that the governor is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Then under Article 201, the governor has one more option. The governor has one more power with regard to a bill that has been passed by the state legislature. Under Article 201, the governor can reserve this bill. Instead of granting assent or just withholding or returning it, the governor can reserve the bill for the consideration of the President of India. And then the President of India, obviously based on the aid and advice of the Central Council of Ministers, will decide whether to grant assent to this bill or to send it back to the state legislature through the governor. So this is what the constitution provides for. This ensures that the state bills are in congruence with central law and constitutional provisions. But quite often, this power of the governor is often seen to be misused. Since the constitution does not prescribe a time limit, even when it is reserved for the consideration of the president, there is no time limit given over here. There is no deadline which has been prescribed by the constitution. So in the case of Tamil Nadu, right, this matter reached the Supreme Court. Tamil Nadu approached the Supreme Court since 10 bills passed by the elected state legislature had been basically withheld by the governor. The governor had not given the assent or just withheld it. Some bills were reserved for the consideration of the president. Some bills were sent back to the legislature. Legislature had passed it again. And still, even though the governor is constitutionally bound to grant his assent, he had still withheld the assent. So this had essentially led to a log jam with regard to the legislative business of the state. That's why the state government approached the Supreme Court, and last month in April, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark verdict. A landmark judgment was delivered by the Supreme Court in this particular case. The Supreme Court observed, it was a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court, it observed that the role of R.N. Ravi, the role and the way in which R.N. Ravi was dealing with these bills, it appeared to be illegal, it appeared to be malified in intent, in nature. That's what the Supreme Court observed. And the Supreme Court went on to invoke its special powers under Article 142, which empowers the Supreme Court with an extraordinary power to provide for complete justice. To provide for complete justice in any matter and accordingly issue orders to the concerned authorities. So by invoking this special power, the Supreme Court under Article 142, it set a time limit. It basically ordered the governors take this decision within 3 months, be it granting assent or withholding it or returning it back. The time limit over here is 3 months for a governor, even for reserving it for the consideration of the president. Once the bill is, let's say, sent back to the legislature and the legislature passes that bill again, then the governor has to grant the assent this time within 1 month. So the lack of deadline, which was present under Article 200-201, was essentially cleared by the Supreme Court through its intervention, and it placed this limit, 3 month and 1 month time limit, within which the governor had to grant the assent. So this would cover the power of the president as well. When the bills were reserved for the president's consideration, the same time limits would apply. So this decision was hailed by constitutional experts and legal experts, by state governments, especially by opposition ruled states. The Supreme Court also ruled that if the time limit has passed and the governor has not taken a decision, then these bills are deemed to be passed. So for the first time in India's independent constitutional history, bills have basically come into force, have turned into act without essentially governor granting assent to it. But some criticize the Supreme Court, especially those who favor the central government, or as well as several experts, legal and constitutional experts. They were critical of this approach of the Supreme. They pointed out that this is a classic case of judicial overreach. It was a case of judicial activism. Some even call it judicial despotism. That the judiciary is now stepping into the domain of the legislature and the executive, thus breaching the doctrine of separation of powers, which is also a basic structure of the Indian Constitution. It's part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Now, the question is, can the Supreme Court step into this domain, pass such orders, which again essentially was not even conceptualized with the constitution makers? If the constitution makers did not prescribe a time limit, it essentially meant they didn't want a time limit to be included and leave it to the governor and the president to decide on these matters. Now, if the Supreme Court is stepping in, placing these time limits, so is this entirely constitutional? Does the Supreme Court have the authority to do that? That to a two-judge bench, not a constitution bench. Ideally, such decisions are taken by a five-judge constitution bench. So now the government, through the President of India, has sought the advice of the Supreme Court itself. Because under Article 143, the President of India can seek the advice of the Supreme Court. The President can set out a few questions, or terms of reference to the Supreme Court, asking for the Supreme Court to interpret these questions. So President Draupadi Murmu has raised 14 questions regarding these matters. Does this represent a case of judicial overreach? Is it a case of judicial activism? The Vice President of India was very critical of the role of the Supreme Court. He even called Article 142 as a nuclear missile. He essentially meant the Supreme Court is overstepping its mandate, stepping into the domain of the parliament, the executive. So see, this is indeed a debatable matter. So now what the Supreme Court would do, it will set up a five-judge constitution bench to look at these 14 questions related to Article 200, 201, 142, which the President of India has raised. But please remember, the advice that the Supreme Court will render under Article 143, it is merely an advice. It is not binding on the government. Advice given by the Supreme Court under Article 143 under a presidential reference is not binding on the government, and more importantly, advice will not overturn the previous judgment. The government can go on appeal against the judgment that the Supreme Court passed last month, where it set these time limits for the governor, right? But mere advice by the Supreme Court will not overturn the judgment which has already been passed. So constitutional and legal experts are of the view, especially those quoted in the editorial. The editorial says that the government is unnecessarily dragging this issue. It should have accepted what the Supreme Court said. It should have accepted the deadline. It was much needed because these recommendations are present previously as well. In fact, Supreme Court has not drawn the time limit out of thin air without any logic or rationale. I'm sure you would have heard about the Sarkaria Commission, the Punchi Commission, both of which dealt with center-state relations. They recommended a lot of changes with regard to the role and office of the governor, especially to deal with the allegations that the governor often acts like an agent of the center. Sarkaria Commission, Punchi Commission were also of the view that the governor's powers with regard to granting assent to a bill should be limited by placing a time limit, because the authority to make laws at the state level under the state subjects, as outlined under Schedule 7, it clearly lies with the state legislature, which is a democratically elected body. And don't forget, governor is a unelected official appointed by the central government. So that's why there is a criticism as well against the office of the governor, that there is a tyranny of the unelected on elected legislatures. But there is a counterpoint as well. The counterpoint is that the Supreme Court, when it steps in, even that would be seen as a tyranny of the unelected. The judges are not elected, right? And if Supreme Court is giving directions to the president, to the legislature as well, to the parliament, that could also be seen as the tyranny of the unelected over the elected. So this again involves very delicate constitutional matters and legal matters. But some are of the view that such an intervention was needed. A time limit had to be placed. In fact, the government itself had provided some of these recommendations few years ago when Ministry of Home Affairs issued a office memorandum back in 2016. The MHA itself had recommended that there should be time limits prescribed. This was an internal recommendation within the Home Ministry, which deals with center-state relations. The Supreme Court, when it passed this ruling last month, it relied upon this order of the Home Ministry itself. It's not that the Supreme Court, it simply came out with a random time limit. This time limit was basically recommended by the Home Ministry as well a few years ago. And these recommendations have been part of various commissions like Sarkaria and Punchi Commission. But critics are arguing that the Supreme Court is simply overstepping its mandate. Can the Supreme Court exercise judicial review over a bill which has not even become a law? These were still bills. They have not become laws. Supreme Court essentially has the power of judicial review, ideally on constitutional matters and with regard to laws which have already been enacted. So critics are arguing that the judiciary is overstepping. The judiciary is resorting to activism. It's a case of overreach, which is eating away the jurisdiction of the executive and the legislature. So that is the counter argument to what you find in the editorial, because editorial is backing the Supreme Court's ruling and questioning the government itself and the president for raising this unnecessary reference, which could drag this matter. The editorial is of the view that the government should have just followed what the Supreme Court said. But the presidential reference also brings up some valid questions, be it regarding the power of judicial review, be it regarding the time limit which has been set, the clarity which is necessary with regard to Article 200, 201. These are some very valid questions that have been brought up. But see, don't forget, under Article 361, the president and the governor do enjoy a degree of immunity when it comes to the power of judicial review. The actions of the president and governor during the discharge of their duties, it is beyond question. They are not answerable to any courts. So, as this involves key constitutional matters, the president has raised this reference under Article 143. So now we have to wait and watch. The Supreme Court will likely constitute a constitutional bench, most likely a 5-judge constitution bench, to answer these 14 questions raised by the government. And then, based on what the Supreme Court says, we have to see what the government will do. Because as I said, the advice of the Supreme Court under Article 143 is not binding on the government. And more importantly, it will not overrule the existing judgment. So let's wait and watch. But as of now, this is what you need to understand. So before I take up the next article, those who are giving prelims 2025 and even those who are preparing for 2026, you have a great opportunity to attempt full-length mock papers. So till the 18th of May, Unacademy is conducting the prelims mock drill, both for GS and CSAT. So do take up these papers, try to attempt these full-length papers to practice so that you can test your preparation. It's a great way to get a feedback and get to know where you stand with regard to the preparation for this exam. So those interested can take up the test by using the link provided in the description box below. Now let's look at the next editorial. This editorial deals with the recent deaths that have occurred, the unfortunate deaths that have occurred in Punjab, in Haryana, and in many other parts of the country because of the consumption of illegal liquor, which is also often referred to as hooch, also referred to as spurious liquor, which is adulterated, containing toxic substances. So many people in India have been losing their lives, and this is not happening for the first time, or it's not a one off incident. Since many, many decades, there have been several such incidents. Every year, there are many such tragedies which occur in different parts of the country. We have seen very big tragedies occurring in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala as well. So, across India, this is a major challenge where people lose their lives. 20, 30, 40 people get killed because they would have consumed illegal liquor or spurious liquor, also known as hooch. So, now why isn't the government regulating the production and the sale and distribution of illegal liquor? What does this actually contain? Why is it toxic? And who is vulnerable? That is what we need to understand, because this article represents a key social issue in our country. This is not just about one tragedy, one disaster which has happened. There is a deep underlying social cause. Now, if you look at illegal liquor, this is often produced obviously by illegal hooch making factories, often referred to as bootleggers. They would not be registered, they would not be licensed to produce liquor. These are makeshift facilities. They basically set up these illegal camps in remote areas or in rural areas where where you don't have much of a presence of the police and administration, or sometimes in forests or in agricultural fields. And they keep shifting the location as well, because clearly these are illegal factories which will be producing the hooch. So see, in alcohol which is consumed, what you have is ethanol. Ethanol is still fit for human consumption, but of course, alcohol consumption itself is dangerous for human health. But ethanol consumption is essentially certified. There is a entire registration process for that. State governments control the quality as well when it comes to alcohol production, apart from taxing uh, alcohol, right? But these bootleggers, what they produce, the hooch that they produce, it primarily contains methanol, industrial methanol in particular. Now, this is another type of alcohol, or what we call as industrial alcohol, used for industrial activities and industrial purposes. This alcohol is highly toxic to human health, right? This can cause death. It can cause immediate death. Now, what these bootleggers do, they take industrial alcohol, which is cheaper compared to producing ethanol through the traditional natural process. Ethanol production, I'm sure you know, it's done by basically fermenting molasses, by fermenting various food items. Could be produced using potatoes, could be produced using sugarcane, right? It could be produced using wheat and barley. So various alcohols are produced and distilled and properly processed to produce ethanol, which is essentially a legal registered business. Whereas in the illegal alcohol industry, it's primarily industrial methanol, industrial alcohol, which is used, which is highly toxic. They even add some very controversial ingredients, including scorpions. They add some toxic chemicals as well. Because see, their whole goal is to reduce the cost and maximize their profits, because these are illegal businesses. Now, what they do is they take the high concentration of industrial alcohol, they take these toxic additives, and they try to dilute it. These bootleggers who produce the hooch, they think that they can make it safe for human consumption by diluting it, by ensuring that the right proportions are used. But you tell me, these guys who produce illegal alcohol, they are not chemical engineers or scientists. They're not experts. They're not professionals, right? So they have no clue about what they're doing most of the times. So they end up producing spurious liquor, which could be highly adulterated with toxic content. And once it is consumed, it can cause immediate death. They add some highly questionable ingredients as well. There have been cases where bootleggers have used leather, animal skin, and what not to produce hooch. Obviously, such a process, which is not regulated, which is not under the purview of, or under the surveillance of the authorities, obviously will lead to such incident. But the ones who actually suffer from this tragedy are the poor people. The ones who drink hooch are essentially the ones who can't afford to buy alcohol from the registered stores. So poor people, those who are below poverty line, especially daily wage earners, right? Those who are earning a daily wage, it could be construction workers, sometimes it could be street vendors, it could be beggars as well, right? Those who do not have enough money with them. So there is a major problem, a social issue in our country, which is alcohol addiction, particularly amongst the poor. Poor men specifically, right? They display high levels of alcohol addiction due to the lack of economic opportunities, the lack of education, lack of awareness. Alcohol addiction becomes their guilty pleasure, right? Every evening after earning a daily wage, most daily wage earners, what they do, they spend most of the money on illegal liquor. They don't even sometimes feed their family. That is what even results in domestic abuse and domestic violence, right? These husbands often get drunk and they go back home and end up beating their wives and children. So this is a deep social issue. Now the question is, what's the government doing? What are the state governments doing? They are primarily responsible for regulating alcohol. What are the authorities doing? What's the police doing? What's the central government doing as well? See, this highlights the poor governance in the country and the heights of corruption, especially at the lower levels of governance and policing. These illegal hooch making factories and bootleggers cannot function without collusion of the police and local politicians. Low level politicians, local politicians, right? Many times they would be involved in this business or they would be getting a cut, they would be getting a kickback or a commission. The police and the authorities as well, they would be taking bribes and they'll be looking the other way. It's not that we don't have regulations or laws. There are laws prohibiting the production of illegal alcohol. It's a criminal offense. There is a entire legal mechanism present in the country to enforce the regulations, but who will enforce them? The authorities, the police. But they are in a corrupt nexus with local politicians and these bootleggers. Many times local politicians, they come up to power, they rise up to power by relying on illegal hooch which is produced. So this has become extremely dangerous, hazardous. For example, at the state level, you have the Poison Act. Industrial alcohol is a designated poison. It can't be sold freely. It can't be used for other purposes except for the designated permitted purposes. Now, who is selling industrial alcohol to these bootleggers? Obviously, there is a leakage which is happening in the system. The methanol is meant only for industrial purposes, only those who have licenses, which means somebody is misusing the license or creating false documents and diverting industrial alcohol towards the hooch industry. And innocent people are paying the price. Families are getting destroyed. Many people lose their lives, and they're all from the poor section of the society. So, this corrupt nexus has to be tackled. There is a need to enforce the law, enforce the regulations. And the only way it can be done is by basically cracking down on the corrupt nexus between the police and politicians and the authorities who are basically working in cahoots with these bootleggers and illegal liquor factories. So, this is the important issue that you need to be aware of, right? Because it is indeed a big social issue which keeps recurring. And apparently, we still haven't found a solution to it. Next, we will move on to a very important column on page number 8. This column focuses on nutrition in the country. Nutrition, especially for women, for adolescent girls, and how India is staring at a massive problem of malnutrition, undernutrition when it comes to women and adolescent girls. Now, I'm sure some of you might be thinking this is a topic we have discussed in the last, let's say, 2-3 months, right? We have covered this at least a couple of times. But the writer here is providing a fresh perspective as she is evaluating the performance of the Poshan scheme, Poshan Abhiyan, which is one of the key programs driven by the Modi government. See, the Poshan Abhiyan was launched in 2018 with a substantial financial allocation of 24,000 crores in order to ensure that we tackle malnutrition and undernutrition amongst India's pregnant women, lactating women, adolescent girls, etc. The focus of the program was primarily women and children to improve their nutritional indicators. But if you look at the data which has been brought out by National Family Health Survey 5, The data is quite alarming. Now, if you look at women in the age group of 15 to 49 years, if you look at this age group, which includes adolescent girls and as well as women in their reproductive age, levels of anemia in the country is absolutely alarming. If you look at the percentage of women who are anemic, it is a staggering 57%. 57% of the women in the country between 15 to 49 years of age are anemic, which is a clear result of undernutrition. Now, compare this with the number of men who are anemic. It is less than half. Just 26% of men are anemic. So, what does this tell you? It's not just about physiological differences between men and women. This is a direct result of the socio-economic differences. It highlights the underlying social root cause, which is patriarchy in the society. That men are able to access better nutrition, whereas women are denied access to good nutrition. This is a very alarming picture which is presented. If you look at nutritional indicators of pregnant and lactating women, it is even more alarming in the country, right? And this is not just a feature of low income households, right? Across social strata, it is often seen that women are often undernourished. They don't have the right access to nutrition, the right nutrients. So, this is not just a food security problem. Don't think this is because of the inability of the government to provide food to everyone. That's not the root cause here. India runs one of the biggest food security programs in the world, the public distribution system, on which more than 800 million people, 80 crore people are dependent upon. We have several other schemes, the Antyodaya Anna Yojana, midday meals program at the school level. There are several nutrition oriented programs focusing on micronutrients as well. Anganwadi centers, ICDS program, where it is implemented through Anganwadi centers. It has been able to improve nutrition levels, but still the country is facing a serious challenge of undernutrition with regard to the women in the country and adolescent girls in the country. So, why is it happening? This is largely because in a household, right, in a traditional orthodox household, in an orthodox patriarchal society, men and boys are always prioritized, especially when a choice has to be made. Right? You take a poor household, for example, or a low income household. When their incomes are limited, when their access to good, healthy, nutritious food is limited, it often ends up that men and boys get well fed. At least some of their nutritional requirements are met. But women and girls are sidelined. You might have seen this in several traditional households even today, even in middle and upper class households as well, where women tend to eat later. They're expected to serve the husbands, serve the men in the household, serve the elderly, the children, feed everyone. They end up eating last. So this may not be much of a problem, let's say in middle or upper class households, but in lower income households, when the food availability is limited, if women has served everything to the family, the women would end up eating just what is left behind. Many times they go hungry as well. The nutrition of girls is given a lesser priority compared to the nutrition of boys. So this is a deep social problem that is present. It's a clear result of the gender disparity in the society, the patriarchy in the society, where orthodox thinking undermines the nutritional access for women and girls. The only way out of this, only solution is to make women more financially independent. In several households, women are financially dependent on the male members of the household, right? Quite often, women they're essentially expected to be housewives, caretakers. They're not expected to have a job of their own. And even if they have a job, they're expected to contribute their salary towards the family. They don't have the decision making power. It's not just about control over money. Don't think we are reducing it to a transactional um, level. No, that's not the point here. When you don't have financial autonomy in the household, you cannot take decisions for your family. If the woman of the household is financially independent, if she's in a position of decision making, she can draw a line. She can say that even the girl child has to be fed equally. just like the boy child or the men in the household. But when the women do not have the decision making power, which stems from their financial weakness, that is when this issue props up. So, on one hand, we need to promote nutrition oriented schemes. We need to provide food security in the country, ensure better distribution of food grains and supplies. Correct. But more importantly, we have to solve the underlying social problem. Empower women financially, make them independent, make them decision makers in the household. And studies have proven this time and again. Have you heard of Nobel laureate Esther Duflo, won the Nobel for economics? Esther Duflo's research, which has focused on India as well, has clearly shown that women were made decision makers in the family when they became financially more independent. There was a clear outcome in terms of health and nutrition, because women tend to spend that money or decide that money should be spent on health and nutrition, which other members of the family may not spend upon. This is where it makes a big difference in rural parts of the country, amongst lower income sections of the country. Ensuring that women become more financially independent, empowering them through their livelihood is critical. And this is where self help groups, Anganwadi centers can play a big role. Self help groups can drive women led businesses, small enterprises, create opportunities for women. Anganwadi centers can secure the nutritional access and focus on pregnant lactating women and as well as on adolescent girls to deliver the right nutrition which is necessary. So, this grassroots revolution needs to happen. It's about social upliftment of women to make women decision makers in each and every household, because it is an established fact that when women become decision makers in the family, they end up allocating the right financial resources for food, nutrition, and health. This automatically improves the indicators for women and the girl child in the house. So that is what you learn from this column. You don't have to go into other details, it's not needed. It's the overall analysis with the statistics that I gave you, the couple of important statistics that I presented. So if you're able to note this down, this is more than enough. Now let's look at another article on page 11. This is related to the recent India-Pakistan tensions and Operation Sindoor, through which India carried out decisive military action against Pakistan to punish the country for sponsoring terrorism against India. Now that the ceasefire has come into effect, the tensions have slowly subsided. But there is another war going on between India-Pakistan, a silent war, the war of narratives, or what we call as information warfare. Though India clearly had a military edge and delivered a crushing blow to Pakistani state and non state actors, it, it appears that India lost the narrative battle. Many experts agree to this as well, that in front of the global community, Pakistan managed to spin its narrative because of Pakistan being more prudent in its information management. Though it has purely spread fake news, propaganda, but still, Pakistan has managed to spin the narrative in its favor. And just look at how global media reports the developments related to Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor. The Indian narrative has almost been lost, right? In fact, if you observe this time, several foreign governments have not explicitly supported India during Operation Sindoor. Now, if I compare this with Balkot airstrikes, many countries stood with India. They explicitly said that Pulwama attack was a terror attack and India had a right to defend itself by carrying out Balkot airstrikes. Because they knew it was a one-off strike from India, it would not escalate tensions between India and Pakistan back in 2019. This time, given the more serious escalation through Pahalgam attack, though many countries sympathized with India, they expressed support to India, they called Pahalgam attack as a terrorist attack. Many countries, even close friends of India, did not stand with India and openly supported Operation Sindh. Instead, they brought pressure on India as well as Pakistan to tone down the tensions, to scale back from the conflict. This is because it appears that India has been losing the narrative war. It's very important to convince foreign governments, to convince foreign capitals, and to create support in India's favor. That's why the government has already engaged foreign governments. For example, immediately after Pahalgam attack, whatever evidence and intelligence we had to link the terrorists who carried out the dastardly attack with Pakistani state establishment, we shared all of that evidence and intelligence with the ambassadors and high commissioners stationed in Delhi. We shared that evidence and intelligence with foreign capitals, with foreign governments as well, to build the Indian narrative. Right? Indian ambassadors, high commissioners in other countries were asked to present the data, the information to the foreign department, the State Department of the other countries, to meet the leadership and apprise them of the developments, why India had to defend itself. But still, it has not been enough. So the government is now planning to set up all party delegations. Around 10 all party delegations are being set up, where members, especially MPs from different parties, will be drawn and they will be sent on a mission to European countries, African countries, Asian countries, and even to major powers like US, Russia, etc. Why? To present India's viewpoint. This would not just be the viewpoint of the government, it's an all party delegation drawing from the opposition as well. The government has already chosen few MPs from Congress, from various other opposition parties to lead the delegation to raise India's voice against Pakistan, to represent India's viewpoint, to build the narrative. So, this is an important update. This presents a united front, right? In front of the world, it shows that the country is united in its war against terrorism. It shows that India as a nation stands united against Pakistan sponsored terrorism. So, the government is prioritizing this particular initiative, a diplomatic offensive on Pakistan. And these all party delegations, comprising of MPs from across parties, they will go to different capitals, raise India's voice. They will address press conferences. They will attend the legislative meetings of the other countries. They will meet maybe the head of states, head of governments, or foreign ministers and brief them about Pahalgam attack and India's necessity to conduct Operation Sindoor. So this is again part of India's effort to manage the narrative and to counter the propaganda, the disinformation campaign of Pakistan, to defeat the information warfare that Pakistan has unleashed against India. Please take a note of this point as well. Next, on page 12, we have an update with regard to environmental clearances. The topic, which is the focus of this article, would be environmental clearance. Now, what's an environmental clearance? See, before any new project is started, any large public or private project is taken up, of course, there is a environmental audit, or what we call as environment impact assessment, which is carried out, the EIA. So this is mandated by the Environment Ministry. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has mandated that before any large scale project is taken up, there has to be a thorough environmental assessment, the impact assessment. That is, how will the project affect the environment? What will be the negative impact? Will it cause any pollution? Will it affect the water and soil system? Will it lead to any release of toxic effluents? Will it lead to any deforestation? Will it affect the biodiversity? All these factors are considered and presented in the form of the environment impact assessment. So the project proponent who is pushing for this project, right? It could be a government organization or a private company. They will submit the environment impact assessment to the Environment Ministry for the approval. So if Environment Ministry is satisfied, if it's satisfied with the assessment and the measures that the project proponent is proposing to protect the environment, because let's say a project is leading to deforestation, let's say to set up a big factory, to set up a, let's say, a railway line, some trees have to be cut. It's necessary for nation building, it's necessary for the economy. But the project proponent should compensate for the loss. They can take up afforestation measure nearby the project, correct? They can ensure they can treat all the effluents and the pollution happening from their project and contribute money to that, take ownership of the pollution they are causing, and implement the polluter pays principle. So if these guarantees are given by the project proponent, then the Environment Ministry will grant the clearance for the project. The environmental clearance is granted, EC is obtained. Only then the construction of the project can begin. This is the standard process, the standard procedure. But now it has come to light that in many, many instances, project proponents, what they do is, when they take up an extension of an existing project, when they take up, let's say, some renewal work, of an existing project. They don't present it as a new project or a new initiative. Let's say there is an existing factory for which EC was obtained many years ago. Now they want to expand the factory, they want to redesign, they want to essentially renovate the factory entirely. Now, ideally, according to the rules of the Environment Ministry, they have to go through this procedure again. They have to conduct the environment impact assessment and obtain a new environmental clearance because there will be a change in the nature of the project. But what has been noticed is that by the Supreme Court was looking into this matter, that in several cases, project proponents are cutting a shortcut. They're basically bypassing the procedures. They are using the old environmental clearance, which they had got many years ago, even for new projects, even for renewal projects or any renovation projects. If they're planning an expansion, they're using old environmental clearances and going ahead with the construction. Now, this retrospective application of environmental clearance is clearly not provided under the law. The Environment Ministry has enabled it. It has basically allowed for the ex post facto application of these orders. So clearances given 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they are still considered as valid, even though it's an entirely new project which might be coming up in the name of renovation, in the name of expansion. A brand new project might be coming up on the same site, and they might use old environmental clearances and still bulldoze ahead and go ahead with the project, causing significant damage to the environment. That's why the Supreme Court has come down very hard on this. The Supreme Court has directed the Environment Ministry and any project proponent that old environmental clearances cannot be given retrospective effect. If there is a renovation planned or an expansion planned or a new project coming up on the same site, you have to go through this process again. You have to conduct the impact assessment and then get a new environmental clearance. You can't give retrospective effect to old environmental clearances and assume that these projects will not have any other detrimental impact on the environment. So that is the issue which the Supreme Court has flagged. It has basically struck down retrospective application of environmental clearances. It has strictly ordered the Environment Ministry to not accept old environmental clearances for any projects which are being taken up now. Even if it's an expansion of an old project, renewal of an old project or upgradation as well, they have to go through the impact assessment again. They have to submit a new EIA because circumstances would have changed. The environmental factors would have changed. What if, let's say, a factory was started with very limited pollution and effluents, but what if the owners are now planning to produce something which is highly toxic, highly hazardous to the environment? Can they simply go ahead with the old environmental clearance and damage the environment? Then who will be held accountable? That's why the Supreme Court has clearly struck down the retrospective application of old environmental clearances. Going forward, project proponents will have to obtain a new environmental clearance from the ministry. Only then they can continue with any project, be it not just a new project, of course, but even old upgradation projects as well will have to obtain fresh environmental clearances. Next, there's another article related to India's foreign relations. This time, the article is focused on India-Afghanistan relations, particularly India's engagement with Taliban, which is growing day by day. Now, this article is very important because it contains a statement from India's foreign minister, external affairs minister. Dr. Jaishankar has said that we will witness something very, very bold from India with regard to engaging with Afghanistan and the Taliban regime, the interim government in Afghanistan. Now, please understand, the Taliban, when it was in power for the first time from 1996 to 2001, India had designated Taliban as a terrorist entity. Taliban had broken all ties with India. It had essentially thrown out the Indian diplomats as well and treated India as a hostile threat, as Taliban was essentially a puppet of Pakistan's ISI and the army. Taliban, which was a byproduct of the Afghan Mujahideen, right? The Afghan Mujahideen, which was created by Pakistan, US, and other allies during Cold War to counter the Soviet Union. After Soviet forces were pushed out of Afghanistan, the Mujahideen essentially engaged in a power conflict, a civil war, drawing Afghanistan into this long conflict. And eventually, the Taliban, which was a radical student-led organization of the Mujahideen, they managed to capture power in 1996 with the backing of Pakistan. Because Pakistan saw Afghanistan as a part of its strategic depth. Pakistan believed that Afghanistan would give strategic depth. The deep state of Pakistan believed that if they controlled the politics in Afghanistan through entities like Taliban, they could use Afghan soil, Afghan territory for breeding anti India terror groups. That's what Pakistan had done. Terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, which were all anti India terror groups nurtured and cultivated by Pakistan, they were given shelter along the Af-Pak border. The Taliban would encourage them, support them. In fact, they were also in touch with Al Qaeda, which was sheltered by the Taliban. So a close nexus existed between terror groups like Al Qaeda and the radical factions of Taliban with anti India terror groups like Jaish e Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, and the others. It's well established through Indian intelligence reports that leaders like Masood Azhar and Syed Salahuddin, who are most wanted terrorists by India, who head Jaish e Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, respectively, it's well known that they had met Al Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden. They had met with Talibani leadership. This had been a matter of deep concern for India for many years. So India never engaged with Taliban. We treated Taliban as a terror entity, as it was sheltering anti-India terror groups. That had been our official position. But things started changing in 2021. Taliban made a comeback. The US had invaded Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. It had toppled the Taliban regime, and Taliban became an insurgent organization trying to make a comeback. US had installed an Afghan civilian government. India built very good relations with the Afghan civilian government. We also invested heavily in Afghanistan, up to $3 billion. We built highways. We built the Kabul Parliament building. We built the Salma Dam. We also built the Chabahar port in Iran to create an alternate route into Afghanistan to improve trade opportunities and economic opportunities. We entered into a tripartite agreement with Iran and Afghanistan to create a trade route via the Chabahar port, to link Chabahar port with an Indian-built highway in Afghanistan, the Zaranj-Dilaram highway, which India had built in Afghanistan. India's ambition was we could use Chabahar port and the Zaranj-Dilaram highway in Afghanistan to further extend this connectivity into Central Asia. So India had some very ambitious plans. But eventually, the US retreated. The US was losing ground to the Taliban, which was carrying out a resurgence. Taliban's attacks kept on increasing, and Donald Trump, during his first presidency, directly negotiated with Taliban and struck a peace deal. In 2020, the Doha peace deal was signed. Qatar was the mediator, and US and Taliban directly struck a deal, allowing for US to exit the conflict. US pulled out the troops in 2021, suddenly exited from Afghanistan, creating a space for Taliban to take over. The Taliban toppled the Afghan government, captured power, and became the interim government of the country. Now the dilemma came up for India because the US never involved India in these talks and negotiations. Donald Trump previously, when he started the peace talks with Taliban, he kept India completely out of it. And India's official position till 2021 was we will not talk to Taliban. We can't talk to a terror entity. It was a dilemma for India. Given Taliban's close ties with the Pakistani deep state and terror groups, it was very challenging for India to open out and to talk to Taliban. But this was at a time when others were normalizing their relations. China, Iran, even Russia for that matter. Because see, Soviet Union was targeted by the Afghan Mujahideen. Taliban was a byproduct of it, and Russia is the successor of the Soviet Union. Russia didn't have a problem. Russia also managed to talk to Taliban. So all the countries were being realistic, striking their deals with Taliban to protect their interests. India was the only outlier. India couldn't do it because not just on ideological grounds, but also we had a very practical concern. The Taliban is close to Pakistani deep state. It is linked with anti-India terror groups. So how do we talk to Taliban? But after Taliban came to power in 2021, we had no other choice. We had to engage the Taliban. But this time, the good thing for India was Taliban was slightly different. Not that they were reformed or moderate. No, that has not changed. Taliban is still a radical fundamentalist entity violating the rights of religious minorities and women in the country. It still has ties with terror groups. But the difference with the Taliban this time was it was craving recognition. The last time when they came to power, they didn't care about who recognized them or not. But this time, it matters a lot because most of Afghan assets, they are frozen. They are under sanctions. whatever financial assets and foreign assets were held by the Afghan civilian government, to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Taliban, sanctions have been imposed and all these assets have been frozen by the global institutions and the global powers. The Taliban cannot access any of these assets. Taliban is struggling to administer the country, right? Because in Afghanistan there is massive hunger, there are regular disasters, especially earthquakes and floods. Afghanistan is not able to provide for basic governance. So they desperately need recognition, and they know that any recognition from India or any engagement with India, forget recognition, forget official recognition from India, which may not happen. At least engagement with India, relations with India would go a long way to essentially bolster the image of the Taliban. I think that's why Taliban and its statements recently are very interesting. After the Pahalgam attack, Taliban issued a statement condemning the attack. Imagine a radical group like Taliban condemning a terror attack against India. It's ironic, but works for Indian interests. Now, this comes at a time when Taliban and Pakistan have broken up, almost broken up. It's like two brothers who had had a fight. They're broken apart, and this could work to India's advantage. Why have they broken up? Because, see, on one hand, Pakistan has been targeting Afghan refugees. Pakistan was hosting a very large Afghan refugee population, most of them from the Pashtun community. Taliban is essentially a Pashtun dominated group. Pashtuns are the dominant ethnic indigenous tribe in Afghanistan as well, in southern and western Afghanistan in particular. So when Pakistan started pushing out Afghan refugees, started targeting them, obviously the Afghan Taliban was concerned. This became an issue between them. Then more importantly, there is the Pakistan branch of the Taliban. Just like you have Afghan Taliban, which is now in power, which has formed the interim government, there is a Pakistani faction as well. The Pashtuns on the Pakistani side, right? Because Pashtuns don't recognize the border. They don't recognize the Durand line, which is the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This was a British era boundary that was drawn that divided the Pashtun community. So the Talibani faction on the Pakistani side, it has been targeting the Pakistani state. Just like Afghan Taliban toppled the Afghan government and captured power, the goal of Pakistan Taliban, also known as the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, is to tackle the Pakistani state, the government, the army, the ISI, to throw them out and capture power in the country to form a Islamic state. So now Pakistan has been facing repeated terror attacks from the TTP. And it has been alleged that Afghan Taliban is sheltering the TTP and protecting them. Because obviously they're brother organizations, they're related to each other. So Pakistan launched military strikes in the last 2 to 3 years. Pakistan has conducted airstrikes on Afghan soil and Afghan territory. It has conducted military incursions, launched major army offensives aimed at the TTP, and this has not been liked by Afghan Taliban. Because according to Afghan Taliban, Pakistan is targeting their brothers in TTP, in Pakistan Taliban. This has created a permanent rift, which could end up breaking the ties between Pakistan and Taliban. And this is great news for India. As they say, when two people fight, the third one can benefit. So India has been slowly cultivating ties with Taliban. In 2021, Indian ambassador in Qatar, where Taliban had a political office in Doha, that's where Taliban negotiated with the US. So the Indian ambassador to Qatar was asked by the government to formally reach out to the Taliban leadership and maintain diplomatic ties with them. See, we haven't recognized the Taliban regime. Most countries have not recognized the Taliban government. But India started official contact for the first time ever. We had never done this in history. There are records from 80s and 90s that we were in touch with Mujahideen leaders, but primarily through intelligence channels, which were unofficial. For the first time ever, India made official contact in Doha when the Indian ambassador to Qatar was asked to meet the political representative of Taliban. From then, we have slowly taken up this relationship. We started providing assistance. When Afghanistan was hit by earthquakes, floods, we sent out humanitarian assistance. Afghanistan was staring at a food crisis. India sent out several truckloads of food grains and food items to help the people of Afghanistan, because people of Afghanistan, they love India. They have been great supporters of India from a long time. Right? Even sections of Taliban, they actually have a softer inclination towards India. So this goes back for many decades ago. right? India's soft power is quite tremendous in Afghanistan. So to support the people of Afghanistan, India started providing food aid, and we have supported them during difficult times. And gradually, we have been scaling this relationship. See, one challenge for India was in the Taliban regime right now, there are few wanted terrorists. For example, look at the interior minister of the Taliban government. It is it is someone known as Haqqani. Haqqani heads the Haqqani network. Haqqani network is directly responsible for terror attacks against Indian targets. The Indian embassy in Kabul was repeatedly bombed. Indian consulates in Jalalabad, in Herat, in Mazar-e-Sharif were targeted by this faction of Taliban known as Haqqani network. Haqqani network is a notorious terrorist group which is part of the Afghan Taliban. It's one of the factions of Afghan Taliban. And who supports Haqqani network? Who has groomed and cultivated them? Obviously, Pakistan. Pakistan's ISI and army have been using Haqqani network to target India from a long time. Now, the leader of Haqqani network, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who's designated by the UN 1267 Sanctions Committee, he has become the interior minister. Sirajuddin Haqqani is currently the home minister, basically, of the interim Taliban government. So imagine India has to talk to a terrorist, a globally designated terrorist, whose terror group is responsible for killing Indian officials, Indian citizens. In these attacks on our diplomatic missions, Indian officers were killed. Indian diplomats, military and intelligence officers have been killed. Indian workers have been killed. So we had to digest this fact. Whether we like it or not, we had to engage with the Taliban regime to protect our interests. We have $3 billion worth of investments. We have the Chabahar port route to connect with Afghanistan and Central Asia, which can be economically and strategically beneficial because we can corner Pakistan as well, isolate Pakistan as well. So ignoring the fact that Sirajuddin Haqqani is part of the government, we have to engage, and that's what India has learned. Recently, India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri met Taliban's acting Foreign Minister Mutaki in Dubai. Now, this was the biggest development as far as India-Afghan relations were concerned. So now Foreign Minister Jaishankar has said something big is going to happen. In the context of India-Pakistan tensions, in the context of Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor, mostly India is looking at some big step. So right now, maybe India will not recognize the Taliban regime. Maybe that's too far-fetched for a democratic nation to recognize a regime consisting of terrorists that would affect India's image. Maybe we'll not give official recognition, but we are likely to step up the engagement and relations with Taliban. And this would be good for Indian interests as it could allow India to work with Taliban, a Taliban which already has bad blood with Pakistan, and corner and isolate Pakistan in the region. So this could help India to bring pressure from both sides. That's what happened from 2001 to 2021 when we had a friendly government in Afghanistan. During these 20 years, that's what the Manmohan Singh government had cultivated. We cultivated influence with the Afghan government, and it was helpful for India to corner Pakistan. That's why Pakistan even goes to the extent of alleging that India and the then Afghan government were sponsoring TTP. This is blatant lies. Pakistan has never been able to present any evidence to link Indian intelligence or Afghan intelligence agencies with the TTP. That was Pakistani allegation that India's RAW was working with the then Afghan intelligence agency, the NDS, to sponsor the TTP. Right? But Pakistan has never been able to give any evidence to prove that. India has denied these allegations. But the fact is that India and Afghanistan can collectively corner Pakistan and isolate Pakistan. And if Taliban is willing to work with India, India can offer benefits in return. See, Pakistan is already a basket case economy. Pakistan can't economically help the Taliban. Pakistan can't provide assistance to Taliban. Taliban knows that very well. Right? They're very smart that way. They know India can do that. India can provide assistance if necessary. India can make it easier for Taliban to govern and administer the country in return if they agree to not give space for terrorism. If they agree to keep pressure on Pakistan. So that can work in India's favor, and that is what Foreign Minister is indicating, that something bold is going to come from India very soon. We will step up our engagement with Taliban. Maybe we'll not recognize them. We'll not have official ties with them. But we will maintain constant engagement. We will step up our economic, disaster management, and maybe security cooperation. And this could be a big setback for Pakistan. That's why this is a very, very important development. So let's wait and watch. What is this bold, big development that the foreign minister has announced? Now, coming to the prelim section, the last part of today's discussion, we have four articles. Let's go through them quickly. There's another big development in the field of internal and national security. Union Home Minister Amit Shah has inaugurated a revamped MAC, Multi Agency Center. A revamped version of MAC has been inaugurated. So, what is MAC, Multi Agency Center? Let me explain this. It's very, very important. This can be important for mains as well under internal security. Multi Agency Center is a platform under the Intelligence Bureau. I'm sure all of you have heard about IB, Intelligence Bureau, which is India's domestic intelligence agency. So, under the IB, there is a platform called MAC, Multi Agency Center. This was established in 2001 following the Kargil War. Kargil was a huge intelligence failure, a security failure on India's part. This is widely acknowledged. Vajpayee government would acknowledge that the failure to detect the Pakistani intrusion in Kargil Heights was a biggest security and intelligence lapse on India's part. So, following the conflict, the Vajpayee government set up a very important committee, the Kargil Review Committee, the KRC. It was headed by Dr. Subramaniam, the father of Dr. Jaishankar, the current foreign minister. Dr. Subramaniam was a well-known strategic expert. So, under his chairmanship, KRC was set up to suggest security reforms to India's intelligence agencies, armed forces, border guarding forces. And as a result, a big change happened in India's security architecture over the years. Many of these recommendations have been implemented, some have not been implemented, but KRC recommendations has led to a big reform in our security architecture. One of the recommendations was to set up a platform under IB where all the intelligence, especially intelligence related to counterterrorism, can be pooled and shared between different agencies. So, though this agency was set up, this platform was created within IB, where different intelligence and security agencies could come together and share information. It was not functioning very effectively. 2611 attacks in 2008 was a wake-up call, because there were possibilities where 2611 could have possibly been prevented. The IB was sitting on some intelligence which it did not share with RAW. RAW was sitting on some intelligence which it did not share with IB and others. So there was an intelligence lapse during the 2611 Mumbai attacks. So we learned a lesson from the US as well. The US had a very big learning after 9/11 attacks, because even in the US, FBI and CIA, as they were not cooperating with each other, not sharing enough intelligence with each other, there was a case of intelligence that slipped through the gaps. The FBI knew about the hijackers taking flying lessons in American flight schools, but they didn't inform the CIA. The CIA knew that Al Qaeda has a plan to hijack planes and blow them into buildings. They did not share it with FBI and other agencies. So, this failure to share intelligence, to pull intelligence together and jointly work on counterterrorism, it was a big lapse in the US, it was a big lapse in India as well. So, the United States created a platform for sharing counter-terror intelligence called NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center, where all the intelligence agencies come together, pool their intelligence, and share intelligence. A similar model was suggested for India as well. After the Mumbai attacks, then Home Minister P. Chidambaram, right? P. Chidambaram, who became the Home Minister later, he proposed the NCTC model for India. But India's version was slightly different. The NCTC would have its own executive powers. It would not just be a platform for sharing and pooling information. It would have its own executive powers to arrest, to carry out raids, to conduct encounters if necessary. Now, this was seen as excessive power because it would not have any legal backing. It would be set up through a government order, through a government resolution. State governments were worried that NCTC could be misused by the central government to target opposition leaders. Even central security agencies were alarmed that their jurisdiction would be erased. IB, RAW, and other agencies, even the NIA, which was created after 2611 attacks, they were all concerned that if you are creating more parallel agencies with executive powers, it will simply erode the existing jurisdiction as well. So at the central level, there was a lot of opposition to create NCTC. State governments also opposed NCTC. So finally, the idea was dropped. So what India did was, since NCTC could not be set up, the very model of NCTC was flawed as the government proposed executive powers to NCTC. After all the opposition, the idea was dropped finally, and the MAC, was revived. The MAC, which was set up after the Kargil war, which had been largely dysfunctional, was revived in a big manner after the Mumbai attacks. So, Multi Agency Center is a platform under IB for intelligence sharing between different intelligence and security agencies. Not just IB and RAW, even the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, the National Investigation Agency, which is our primary counter-terror law enforcement agency, then Financial Intelligence Unit, which keeps track of suspicious financial activity, then military intelligence agencies, like Army has military intelligence, Navy has naval intelligence, Air Force has air intelligence. There is a defense intelligence agency as well, right? So all the multiple intelligence law enforcement agencies come together under MAC to pool the information they have regarding terrorism. MAC doesn't have any operational powers. It's not a law enforcement agency. It doesn't have its own powers to arrest. It doesn't have its own powers to conduct encounters or raids. It is simply a platform to share information, to bring all intelligence together regarding counterterrorism. So this platform has been critical in India's war against terrorism in the last 2 decades. Many of you may not have heard about it, obviously because IB, RAW are highly secretive agencies. Right? The existence of MAC is not known to many people, apart from few experts who regularly track these matters. So now the government has carried out a big upgrade of the MAC with better facilities, better infrastructure. 500 crores has been spent. So right now, MAC has a reach in each and every district of the country. It is connected with every single district police at the level of the SP, the superintendent of police, who heads the district police, will be linked with the MAC if necessary. Police stations will be linked, and multiple intelligence law enforcement agencies will come together to share and pool information to tackle terrorism. So this platform will be like a operational center. Let's say there are terrorists who have infiltrated into India and we are tracking them. Let's say RAW has some information, IB has some information, they pull that together, they will jointly track these terrorists through the MAC until they are taken down. So that would be the role of MAC. So it's not a police agency, it's not law enforcement agency. It's essentially just a platform for intelligence sharing, and it would be functioning under IB. So it has gone through a major upgrade, and it's now connected with each and every district police. And it brings all these agencies together to pool their information on counterterrorism. Next, we have an article related to history. This article refers to a very important monument in the heart of Delhi. It refers to Rajong Ki Baoli. It basically refers to a step well, a reservoir. If you have been to Qutub Minar, which is located in the Mehrauli architectural complex, right? There are several important monuments located in the Mehrauli architectural complex. Apart from Qutub Minar, you have several other important sites present in the same architectural complex, which dates back to the Mughal era, the Delhi Sultanate, the Lodi dynasty, etc. So the stepwell which you see in the image here, which is basically like a type of a reservoir, right, which stores water. This stepwell, which had faced a lot of degradation, it has been renovated by the Archaeological Survey of India in association with private sponsors like the TCS Foundation. Archaeological Survey of India has completed the full renovation of this step well, which was built in the 16th century, dating back to the Lodi era, the Lodi dynasty. It was in a very bad condition as it was exposed to all the elements, especially rain and sun, and it was not conserved or protected well. But now it has been completely rejuvenated. The water also has been brought back, the monument structure has been strengthened, right? And also the ASI has introduced fish into the pond as well to maintain the water quality. So complete restoration has been carried out and it has now been thrown open to the public. So from a prelims point of view, just know what is this monument. Rajong Ki Baoli, it's a step well, a type of a reservoir built in the 16th century during the Lodi era. Next, on page 13, we have an article. It refers to a report published by the UN, the World Economic Situation and Prospects Report. Please write this down, very important for your prelims, even for your upcoming prelims as well. The World Economic Situation and Prospects Report, it is published twice a year. It is published once at the start of the year, right, around January first week. It is published again mid-year. So the current update is that global economy is facing many challenges. Most countries will see a slowdown in growth. That's what the report is telling you. See, this report, as the name itself suggests, it tells you the economic prospects of the world. It gives you an idea about the global economic situation, the challenges, the opportunities present, and what prospects are present for countries. How will different economies grow in the coming 6 months? That is what the report tells you. So, who brings out this important report? It is brought out by the UN DESA. What is the UN DESA? The UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. So, within UN DESA, there is a Global Economic Monitoring Branch that is responsible for economic analysis and policy. So, this branch of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs publishes this report in association with UNCTAD. I'm sure you would have heard about UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. So these institutions of the UN, with 5 of their regional commissions, they bring out this report, which comes out twice a year, start at the start of the year and during mid-year. So this is followed by policymakers, by investors, by the markets around the world, because this paints a picture about the global economic prospects. Now, the report says that India is going to witness a slowdown. The GDP prospects for India has been cut, and the UN report expects India to grow at 6.3% this fiscal and 6.4% for the next fiscal. So this is a revision of the growth estimates, and the growth prospects for India has been cut. Now, if you just look at the Hindu article, you will think it's all a negative picture, right? That's why I always tell you, please develop a more balanced perspective. Look at this article on PIB's website. The PIB says, despite the global headwinds, according to this UN report, India would still be one of the fastest growing major economy. So headlines make a world of difference, right? On one hand, the Hindu is trying to project the downside of the Indian growth story. The PIB is maybe trying to over exaggerate the growth story of India. The truth lies somewhere in between. That's why, as UPSC aspirants, you should develop this ability to leave out these biases, be it an anti-government bias or a pro-government bias. Both biases are bad, as you are expected to be neutral. So take the content. Hindu is a great platform for good content, but leave out the ideology, leave out the bias. Similarly, government sources might over exaggerate. They might try to overclaim their achievement. So be aware of that. Leave out that bias and take only what is needed for the exam. The report is very clear. The whole global economy is facing a challenge. Obviously, India's economy will also witness a slowdown. That's why I say the headline makes a world of difference. So India will still be the fastest growing economy, but doesn't mean everything is great with Indian economy. There are multiple challenges present in our economy, right? So just be aware of this. That's why I wanted to compare the two. Look at the headlines. The topic is the same. They are both referring to the same UN report. Look at how Hindu is headlining it. Look at how PIB is headlining it. There's a world of difference between the two, right? And both are honestly exaggerated. The actual truth lies somewhere in between. Yes, India is still performing pretty well compared to the global conditions, but doesn't mean we have no other problems, right? At the same time, it doesn't mean India's economy is in a complete shamble. No. So the truth lies somewhere in between. Now, coming to the last article for today, again related to the Indian economy, the RBI is taking a relook at its economic capital framework. What is the economic capital framework? ECF. The economic capital framework of RBI, which is managed as per the provisions of RBI Act, it basically takes stock of the balance sheet of the RBI. It gives you a picture about the capital standing of the RBI. Essentially, how much money is there with the RBI, as simple as that. It gives you a picture about the profits RBI has made, capital which is left, capital which has been spent. The balance sheet of RBI is the economic capital framework, how the capital will be managed, how the profits will be distributed. That is basically the dividends. And who will get most of the dividends? Not you, not me. The government, Nirmala Sitharaman, will get most of these dividends, not into her personal account, but into the government's exchequer. So RBI dividends, they have become a big part of government revenue today. The government depends on it because RBI does generate a lot of surplus. And if there is a way in which government can increase the dividend allocation, this could this could be a huge surplus for the government, and government can increase its expenditure. But government can't dictate to RBI directly that you have to give us so much dividend. That can't be done because there is a clear framework which has been set. That is nothing but your economic capital framework. And this was decided based on the Bimal Jalan Committee, which was set up in 2018. Bimal Jalan was the former RBI governor. Under his chairmanship, a 6-member committee was constituted in 2018 by the Finance Ministry and the RBI. So they recommended as to what should be the economic capital framework regarding the contingent reserve which has to be maintained. RBI should maintain some funds for emergency, like how our parents would maintain some emergency funds, right? They should keep some amount of capital ready to be deployed immediately if there is a crisis. And there should be some amount of profit sharing as well, which is dividend distribution. Some capital reserved for the regular activities of RBI. So the balance sheet has to be managed. So Bimal Jalan Committee had given out these recommendations. And according to the committee's recommendations, the contingent risk buffer, CRB, it was supposed to be in the range of 5.5 to 6.5%. The RBI was expected to hold at least 5.5 to 6.5% of its capital as a risk buffer, which will not be touched, as an emergency fund. So RBI will keep this as a contingent risk buffer. If at all there is a crisis, only then RBI will deploy it, which means nobody can touch it. Even the government can't put a hand on it. So this was reducing the share of dividends for the government. The profit sharing which would happen at the end of a fiscal, right? This would slightly go down for the government because the Bimal Jalan Committee recommendation was risk buffer should be 5.5 to 6.5%. But now the government feels there is a need for higher dividend allocation. Because see, after tensions with Pakistan, government is looking to step up the defense expenditure significantly. The government has already announced plans of additional 50,000 crore defense acquisition, right? To prepare for any possible threats. India is looking to step up defense acquisition because as you saw during Operation Sindoor, it is India's defense edge, the technological superiority of the armed forces, which allowed India to dominate over Pakistan. But where will the government find the extra money, right? Taxes can't be increased further. People are already upset with the higher taxes in the country. So one easy route is to take more dividends from the RBI. So now the government has asked the RBI, the finance ministry has asked the RBI to conduct a review to see if this risk buffer can be reduced. Bring it down to maybe 4%, 5%, so that the extra money which is left can now be channeled to the government as a dividend. Right? It can be given to the government as profit sharing, as a dividend, if the risk buffer can be reduced. Bimal Jalan Committee had said 5.5 to 6%, 6.5% risk buffer is needed. If this can be brought down to, let's say, 4 or 4.5%, whatever is freed up, the money which is freed up, the capital, RBI can allocate this to the government as a dividend as part of the profit sharing. And now the government can use that for its increased expenditure. This is something you need to understand as well. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. We have comprehensively covered all the 10 articles. Trust me, you don't have to go back and read the paper again. So I hope you guys have understood everything, liked the discussion. And if you did, please let me know through your likes and comments. Do comment below, because if you interact with us, if you let us know what you feel, if you have any doubts, any questions, or your viewpoints, please express them, because these are analytical discussions. We are not just giving you facts. I'm not just reading out the paper for you, right? The whole purpose is to carry out a critical analysis. So whatever your viewpoints are, please express them so that we get to know about your views, and maybe we can try to bring that into the discussion as well. That is it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.